the code that I'm making. These are the translations that we're translating, but the care and effective work that is always invisibilized around normal work. And the final thing is feminist economics, which, apart from looking at the gender dimensions of work, also questions the normativity of the values that we espouse as part of our economics. So those are the four main influences of DisCos. And are you all familiar with platform co-ops? Or should I do like a quick explainer? For the benefit of those who may not be, platform cooperatives is a movement that was initiated in 2014 by two persons, Nathan Schneider and Trevor Schultz, that basically asks the question, well, we have these Silicon Valley giants that increasingly intermediate our daily lives and transactions. What if we could unbundle them and turn them into co-ops? So thus platform cooperativism says, hey, let's have, instead of like Airbnb, why don't all the homeowners get together, they own the property and form a cooperative, which exists in a digital platform. Then there's open co-ops, and then there's DisCO. So there's kind of a continuity, not a hierarchy. I will insist on that, but let's take you through that. So we have traditional co-ops, platform co-ops, open co-ops, and DisCos. Yes, DisCO is in capital because we like it very much, but we respect all forms of organization that people may have. Traditional cooperatives give us worker ownership and control. Platform co-ops add digital platforms and the digital economy, which is increasingly taking over the way that we interact in the world. Open cooperatives are oriented towards purpose, towards the commons, and with an open source component. And DisCO, they add the care work dimension, open value accounting, and DLTs. DLTs are distributed ledger technologies. So the blockchain is a distributed ledger technology, but there's others which are not as wasteful as the blockchain. So by nature, DisCos are more complicated because they have all these elements embedded. They're like, Russian nested dolls. DisCos are co-ops, but they're also platform co-ops. They're also open co-ops. So DisCos, for those of you who may be familiar with the blockchain space, in blockchain land, usually white men and they're kind of like grand architects plan out this great plans for decentralization, these blueprints, when then they put the humans in without much thinking about process and human relationships. DisCO didn't arise as a grand theory, but from a community of practice, which is the Guerrilla Media Collective. Guerrilla Media Collective is best known for the commons-oriented translation collective, Guerrilla Translation. So within Guerrilla Media Collective, which is our legal form, which is a non-profit, socially oriented cooperative. This is a specific type of cooperative in southern Spain. We have various nodes, we call them. One of them does translation, the other one does promotional work and advocacy. So do various kinds of things. So Guerrilla Translation is well known for its web magazines, where we take content that we like on the internet and we translate it with a very specific license, which is an open license. And we do this because we love translating and we share content by authors that we admire and who may not have otherwise been translated. The DisCO framework is based on a governance model that was originally developed for Guerrilla Translation. So how this works is if we see a text that we like, that we want to translate, we will translate it pro bono. So if you're familiar with the expression, pro bono is usually used in the legal profession when a lawyer decides to use their time and talents to help people, usually in not so good situations, to deal with the law. So we approach authors that may not be in a good financial situation to have their work translated, and we translate it quote unquote for free. But internally, we track that value. We track it by words. At the same time, we're an agency. So if someone with means comes to us and says, hey, we'd love to have this translation by next Tuesday, we put on the agency hat and we say, okay, we will drop a budget for you. And out of this budget, we will pay back our activist work. So basically, let me just go back. How this works is, for example, Sean over there has written like this really great article. We like it. So Sean, we're going to translate it for you for free. And it's 1,000 words. So, Sean doesn't pay anything. We share it with our networks. Everyone's happy. Internally, we write down 100 credits. Okay. Then, for example, someone else comes from an organization or an NGO and say, "Hey, can you translate this?" And what a happy coincidence! It's 1,000 words. So we say to this client, "You will pay us 100 euros." Okay. When we get the money from the client, this 100 euros, 25 of those will go to pay back the people that have worked on Sean's translation. Why do we do this? Because there's a problem with activism. There's a privilege component to activism where only certain kinds of people can afford to do activism. If you're holding down to jobs, if you're the parent of several children, when you get back home at 12 at night, exhausted, you don't have time to change the world, frankly. So DisCO is a way to put activism back to where we think it belongs, which is the workplace. You're going to spend 1/3 of your life in the workplace, you might as well do something useful. Co-ops do that to a degree. So for example, something like a platform co-op, yeah, it's really good, but in DisCO, we don't want to make a more democratic Uber, or we don't want to make like more friendly Airbnb. We want to talk about transportation. We want to talk about housing. We want to talk about what are we doing with our time? Are we adding to the problem or are we co-creating the solution? So I've explained this pro bono, what we call pro bono work, which is the voluntary work, which we call love work, and livelihood work, which is the agency work. But it's all embedded within care work, which is the invisible work, often done by women historically, of taking care, of making sure that everyone is listened to, included, and the whole affective dimension, which frankly rules our lives. But again, if it's delegated and not recognized, some of you familiar with Silvia Federici and other Commons colleagues more from the autonomous tradition will remember the wages for housework movement in the 70s, which is not so much that we need to pay wages for housework, but let's open the conversation because there's people doing housework, but only the person who's doing the job, the official labor is being recognized. So that's one of our big influences. This governance model value tracks commons-oriented pro bono work, ethical market livelihood work, and carer reproductive work for fair distributions of income. Um, just like the co-op principles, we have 7 DisCO principles, which I'll go through fast, and this sits on top of the co-op principles. I do have a problem with the naming of some of the co-op principles. So autonomy and independence to me should be co-creation and interdependence, but we'll talk to ICA because they haven't been updated since 1995. And frankly, I think that a conversation is needed. With all due respect and love to the OG cooperative principles, the 7 DisCO principles are DisCos must be oriented towards social and environmental outcomes, the common good, not just we're a co-op, we take care of ourselves. But for example, I think that there's a co-op in Scotland that develops missile guidance systems for NATO. So, yes, you're a co-op, but maybe we don't want to be friends with you or have you as part of our co-op colleague group. So do something, like I said, don't do like a better Airbnb. There's an issue with housing. There are issues with transportation that frankly need to be addressed. The second one is that the multi-stakeholder, multi-constituent in nature. Those of you familiar with the social care co-ops in Quebec and Emilia-Romagna know how this works. You don't only take care of the co-op membership of the workforce, but of the surrounding. So one example is in a social care co-op, instead of one person, one vote within the co-op, the doctors get a say, the social carers, the nurses get a say, the patients have a vote, and also the family members. So this enfranchises the whole economic framework. Like economics is not limited to your micro company, it has knock-on effects. So giving people a vote, and it's not exactly one person, one vote, you can have different levels. We think it's a much more realistic snapshot. They actively co-create commons. They don't just take from the commons. It's not just IBM investing in Linux, but actually they leave behind a trail of new commons. So for example, in Guerrilla Translation, we've made hundreds of pro bono translations, which would not exist in space-time if we had not done them. So we're creating new commons, not just taking from the commons. And we're also liberating enclosures in the commons. They're locally embedded, globally oriented. I don't want to use this horrible word, globalism, but you know what I mean. And over here is we believe that physical material production has to be kept local with micro manufacturing, but intellectual production, instead of being co-opted by patents and intellectual property, has to be shared so we can produce locally, but we can share these ideas, these blueprints globally. Fifth principle, they're centered on care work and on this affective dimension. And we keep talking about that. We keep talking about power. And within, for example, like a particular DisCO, we're working with 2 DisCOs now, but the original one, Guerrilla Media, that takes shape in we check in daily and we say how we're feeling. And if someone is feeling bad, we know. And if 2 people are feeling bad, we know that those people need the day off and we reroute. Like the original ideals of the internet rerouting around a problem, we self-organize by being very inclusive with the whole care work dimension. New origins and flows of values. I've talked about that with the governance model, with the love work, the pro bono stuff, and how we redirect that value. And 7, they plan for federation. The 6th cooperative principle talks about cooperation on co-ops, but how is this upheld? How does this take place? It may be really nice to say, but tendencies that we see in the co-op movement are a management class that comes from capitalism, the demutualization of co-ops, etc. So I think that we need to rekindle this 6th principle through federation. Federation is not the same as networks, because federations, networks are, you know, a structure, but federations share an animating logic. For this, I think like a good quote that our colleague David Bollier and I are very fond of is by this British ecologist called David Fleming, who said, large-scale problems do not require large-scale solutions. They require lots of small solutions within a large-scale framework. So for us, the small solutions are commons. Our community managed, self-hosted initiatives to address issues according to the needs of the community. You'll notice that I don't talk about resources. That's something else to talk about. For us, individual DisCOs of no more than 15 to 20 people can federate, and then together they create a DisCO network. There's this obsession, you know, on the blockchain world with we have to scale. And to me, scaling just takes the mentality of colonialism, which is we have something small, we just make it bigger, and we don't care what's in its path. So federation allows us a way to turn into an economic counterpower. Bear in mind that cooperatives worldwide, at least in 2017, had the same annual turnover as the market capitalization of Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Apple. So if cooperatives worldwide have the same power as the Silicon Valley giants, we think that federation is the most important issue for the cooperative movement. And also this rekindling with the commons, because co-ops come from the commons, but we feel that maybe they've lost their way. Should you be interested in all these subjects, you can go to disco.coop, our website. And if you want to do some reading, the DisCO manifesto. And here are some emails and stuff, not totally updated, but you can sign up to our newsletter at disco.coop. We also have another great newsletter, and you can visit freefromalife.org, which is this great book, which if any of you speak Spanish, Guerrilla Media has also translated to Spanish, and this has been like a great influence, so here it is. And that's it. I don't know how much time we have left, but thank you for your patience. And whatever time we have left now, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Stacco.
Turn off the...
We have a few minutes for asking for discussion and for thinking together.
Okay, let me... Okay, hey.
What about the questions? People, where are you?
I think Claudia would like to ask a question, as far as I see.
Okay, yes.
Hi, thanks, Stacco. I really enjoyed your presentation. It's really nice to hear, especially the reinvigoration of the cooperative principles and your additions to them. I thought they were really great. My question actually is about the existing cooperative movement. On a personal level, I live in a housing co-op, and I'm wondering if you have any ideas about how the existing cooperative movement might be reinvigorated by some of these ideas, because while some of them have like longevity, have really lasted since the 70s, they can get quite insular and quite sort of stuck in their own ways of doing things. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, we want to provide off-the-shelf resources for people to turn their existing co-ops into DisCOs. And right now, the resources that we have are for worker-owned co-ops and kind of like productive co-ops that offer goods and services in the market. But we do want to do the DisCO applications program, which is like a joke on the Apollo application program, if anyone knows about that. And that includes for CLTs, for CSAs, and for nonprofits, and also for philanthropic funders. So this kind of like DisCO accounting model and the software that we're developing can be tweaked for various iterations beyond worker-owned co-ops, as is the case of Guerrilla Media Collective. And I think there's 4 pilots now that we call them labs, which are co-ops that do offer goods and services. And what I would say, Claudia, is that this is having a conversation. If DisCO attracts you, people don't have to use our software, they don't have to use our resources. If you can creatively address the 7 DisCO principles as creative challenges, you will emerge with different answers. And those are patterns. If you're familiar with David Bollier and Sigrid Helfrich's work on patterns of commoning, these are patterns of DisCOs. And the more divergent they are, the more resources we can give to people to adapt to the local specificity. So for example, when we do like DisCO for community land trusts or housing co-ops, imagine that you and your crew, Claudia, come up with this great 7 answers to the DisCO principles. Great, we have a precedent. So it becomes easier and easier to create DisCOs.
If you are talking about cooperative principles, you are educational in some sense initiative, but are you dealing with this principle in some specific way, like preparing books or some guides to the organizations like yours?
Absolutely, it's a big part of the project. And more than the cooperative principle, I think that we come from the Zapatista tradition of learning by listening. So we don't see learning as this kind of like vectoralist thing where like someone that seems to know a lot teaches someone who's like this privilege. We don't agree with that. So we see it as a process of co-creation. That being said, in the next 3 months, there will be an open access wiki called the DisCO Ball, of course, and also software for people to learn, but also it's totally configurable. For now, in DisCO.coop is deceptively simple, but if you follow the hyperlinks, you will find more and more info. You can sign up to the newsletter. I think that there's one coming out next week. And over the course of the next 6 months, you will see a lot of development in the DisCO. And education is also like your responsibility, and there's different modes of learning. We have a lot of written documentation, but some people like to listen, so we're creating podcasts. Some people are more visual, so we're creating infographics. But the best way to learn about DisCOs is you can do an exercise that we have, which is with your group. You go through the 7 DisCO principles, and you don't even need to have a co-op. You can just make one up. Like, okay, let's have like a co-op that creates flying cars, like something stupid and fun. So you get together with 5 people, like, okay, how would flying cars be good, for social and environmental principles? Well, they can't use jet fuel. They should be solar, but the battery only. So you can go down this speculative rabbit hole, but it's a really fun exercise. But if you do have like an existing co-op, you can see maybe you're halfway there. Maybe you already meet like 5 of the principles. And to be clear, if a co-op meets 3 of the principles, we're happy. We think that this moves them towards the commons. You don't have to be like a DisCO completist. We're not going to give anyone like a medal. So I think that a lot of the education is self-guided.
Mm-hmm. Can I send your resource list to the other participants?
Oh, please do, yeah.
Okay. It will be on the main chat. Yeah, that's it.
And because the website is going like lots of updates right now, I can always put together a list of resources with descriptions of what they are. And if you want to follow up over email or over your own newsletter, I can just give you those resources and you can share them with the rest of the, excuse me, with the rest of the participants.